Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, it was this past Monday when the National Association of Evangelicals, they presented their biblical basis for encouraging evangelical Christians to engage in environmental activism, so that we can help to address the so-called climate crisis. Their report, which they titled, Loving the Least of These, Addressing a Changing Environment. This report begins with a section that encourages us to believe that the climate crisis is real, and then the authors go on to present us with their anecdotal story of children who just want to take a breath of fresh air, but instead they breathe in toxic air that irritates their lungs. And from this springboard, they then go on to insist that environmental activism is a biblical mandate because the Lord has in fact called us to care for the creation, love our neighbors, and witness to the world. Now, with this as their goal, the authors of this NAE report, they've confessed that persuading evangelicals to become environmental activists is no small task. One reason why? Well, it's because evangelicals have been one of the demographics most resistant to action on this issue. And as we consider their point of view, we should take a moment to ask, is it that evangelicals are opposed to being good stewards of the planet? Or is it that we're simply skeptical of climate change science? Well, in order to answer this question, I would appeal to a study from the Yale program on climate change communication. This study reveals that evangelical Christians are most likely to believe that God does expect humans to be good stewards of nature, while at the same time, the same study shows that evangelicals are least likely to believe that climate change is real and caused by humans. That's right, according to this study from Yale, evangelicals are quick to confess that God wants us to become good stewards of our planet, and yet, at the same time, most evangelicals remain skeptical about the so-called science that's currently being used by those who insist that humans are causing a climate catastrophe. And listen, those who insist that the science has been settled on this, these are the same people who are quick to deny any and all scientific research that would lead us to believe that there is no climate crisis at all. Case in point, let's just consider the 1,000+ scientists who recently published the World Climate Declaration. Now, just to be clear, it was this past June when this group of scientists, they're led by the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Ivor Gaver, he published this World Climate Declaration, which begins with this very simple statement. It begins by saying, there is no climate emergency. Wow. Well, so much for the science being settled. And as we drill down into this declaration, we find statements made by these scientists like this, and I quote, climate policy relies on inaccurate models, and then they state this, climate models have many shortcomings and are not remotely plausible as policy tools. That's right. And the same scientists, they also insist that global warming has not increased natural disasters at all. Here's how they put it, and again, I quote, there is no statistical evidence that global warming is intensifying hurricanes, floods, droughts, and such like natural disasters or making them more frequent. However, there is ample evidence that CO2 mitigation measures are as damaging as they are costly. Wow, that's quite the statement made by these scientists. And in conclusion, this paper sums up the point of view of these scientists by insisting, and I quote again, to believe the outcome of a climate model is to believe what the model makers have put in it. This is precisely the problem of today's climate discussion, to which climate models are central. Climate science has degenerated into a discussion based on beliefs, not on sound, self-critical science. Wow, these scientists have completely challenged all of these climate crisis models. And according to them, the climate models being used to create the climate crisis propaganda, it's based on beliefs, just based on beliefs and not on sound, self-critical science. And with that being the case, the evangelical who is completely skeptical of this faith-based belief, well, the evangelical is completely justified by these scientists who then signed the World Climate Declaration. And listen, before you rush to dismiss this group of scientists who signed this statement, well, you ought to know that this group of scientists not only includes the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Ivor Gaver, But it also includes scientists from Cambridge, from Harvard, from Cornell, from MIT, from NASA, and the list of experts goes on and on. It's a list of scientists who insist that climate science should be less political, while climate policies should be more scientific. Sadly, many of the scientists who are currently receiving government grants, well, they appear to have no problem manipulating their models as they exaggerate their predictions of global warming, thereby allowing progressive politicians to create climate crisis policies, which end up hurting most Americans, if not all of us. For example, let's just consider the latest insanity coming out of California. You know, it was last week when California state regulators announced that they're banning the production of new gasoline-powered vehicles as they prepare to stop the sale of all new gas-powered cars by 2035. But then, within a week of this announcement, the California Independent System Operator went on to issue a health bulletin that warned of extreme heat over the Labor Day weekend, which is likely to strain the grid with increased energy demands. With that being the case, California's ISO recommended that the residents there in California reduce their power consumption by avoiding the use of large appliances and to refrain from charging electric vehicles. That's right. California is already struggling to provide their residents with all the electricity that they need for charging the electric vehicles currently in use. Great job, geniuses. Great job. While Governor Gavin Newsom attempts to shift to an all-electric, zero-emission utopian society, the demand for electricity continues to outpace the actual supply. And one reason why is because more and more Californians are purchasing electric vehicles, because they're tired of paying $6 plus for just a gallon of gas. As a result, Newsom has been forced to extend operations on some gas-powered generating plants, which were ticketed for closure. How ironic is that? And all of this because of the, climate crisis models, which continue to be wrong. Case in point, it was back in 2012 when the head of the Polar Ocean Physics Group at the University of Cambridge, this person predicted a complete collapse of the Arctic ice sheet by 2015 or maybe 2016. Not only that, but it was back in 2007 when another scientist from the Department of Oceanography of the U.S. Navy, he informed us that according to their climate modeling, the northern polar waters would be free of ice by summers within just 5 or 6 years. In other words, this model led them to believe that at least 80% of the sea ice in the northern polar waters would be gone by the summers of 2012 or 2013. And not only that, but the same expert also informed us that he expected only just a little bit of ice there to remain beyond 2020. And listen, this prediction was the basis for Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, which presented us with animations that depicted flooding scenarios that would occur as the melting Arctic ice would result in rising sea levels. And yet here we are, entering into the fall of 2022, and the Arctic ice is at the highest level that we've seen since 2012. That's right, the level of sea ice in the northern polar waters is currently above the 10-year average, and not only that, but it's significantly more than the previous few years. With that being the case, it seems to me that the scientists who signed the World Climate Declaration, they're completely correct. They were correct when they insisted that climate models have many shortcomings and are not remotely plausible as policy tools. As for those at the National Association of Evangelicals who are guilty of conflating climate activism with Christian compassion, listen, it's important for us to understand that the climate science that they've embraced, it's little more than manipulated models that are based on beliefs and not on sound, self-critical science. And it's sad to say that the poorest people on the planet are the ones who are going to be hurt the most by this climate crisis activism. Studies have actually shown that humanity, including the world's poorest people, are much better off when fossil fuels are available for the development of their society. And not only that, but the massive costs that come along with reducing emissions, well, this will also lead to an increase of poverty as the number of impoverished people continues to increase by at least 4% because of climate crisis policies. And with that being the case, I must ask, How will climate crisis activism on the part of evangelicals then help impoverished people experience the love of the Lord? And the answer is it won't. Finally, I must insist that the progressives who are preaching the bad news of an impending climate crisis, they're not preaching the good news of Jesus Christ. And instead, they're oftentimes the people who are worshiping the creation rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. With that being the case, listen, rather than encouraging evangelical Christians to engage in environmental activism based on, manipulated models that prove nothing at all, instead of that, let's simply become good stewards of everything that the Lord has given to us. Let's be good stewards of nature. And at the same time, let's get back to the business of preaching the gospel message of Jesus Christ as we continue to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.